Bonnie back to centre stage in light of all the other storms starting to die off. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 3rd. So, we have 4 tropical cyclones still active. Bonnie, Colin, Chaba and Aere moving off towards the north there through the Ryukyu Islands. Chaba moving inland. Bonnie, though, the strongest storm of them all right now, back on a strengthening trend in the eastern Pacific. Colin, we've now determined to be a remnant low at this point. National Hurricane Center still have tropical storm warnings out. It's not been much of an affair during the course of today after it initially got named in the early hours. Day 33 of Atlantic hurricane season, and that's what we've got right now. In the eastern Pacific, on day 50 of hurricane season, we're still giving 20% to an area of interest out at sea, but it's looking pretty appalling now. And Bonnie there making its appearance, a basin crossover, quite rare these days, always been quite rare. The first proper one since Otto, and some might say Cesar Douglas. Chaba moving inland over China, dumping huge amounts of rain, and that's set to continue. And Aere down to a tropical depression by most estimates at this point, and not looking particularly grand. North Indian Ocean looking fairly quiet right now as well. Nothing forming there, and that's to be expected. And I don't think we'll be seeing anything forming there for some time. So let's take a look at our feature today, and you can see Bonnie still chugging out really good tall bursts of convection there as it starts to saunter westwards, continuing to move in that direction, to be honest, starting to make more of a northerly motion, or that northward element rather than a southerly element that it had, in addition to its mostly due westwards heading, and still we can't be too sure about whether it will miss completely those the coastline of Mexico and countries closer to it. Here's some satellite imagery of the Atlantic Ocean right now. You can see there what's left of Colin, not looking particularly pretty, although I'm quite impressed with that wave through the central Caribbean right now, eastern to central Caribbean. That's been looking good today. Still a low chance of development. Eastern Pacific dryness still dominates out west, although you can still see that disturbance just about pulling its weight against it. And of course you can make out Bonnie quite clearly, and very high amounts of moisture inside that one. Looking at the Western Pacific, Chaba takes up a huge chunk of southern China, and to Aere's credit, it started to blow up some more convection on the northern side, which is why we haven't given up on it completely, which is now starting to affect the main islands of Japan, Kyushu particularly involved there, and it could head towards Korea next. Indian Ocean looking like this, and the answer is fairly quiet. Got the typical monsoonal pattern that we've come to know for this time of year, and that's pretty much a done deal. And down in the southern hemisphere, the Australian region to the South Pacific Ocean, there is a significant flooding event going on, I believe, in New South Wales and along the eastern coast of Australia, non-tropical in nature, but that's something to point out there. But generally it's frontal messes occurring from Queensland all the way to north of New Zealand and onwards eastwards. Sea surface temperatures look like this right now, still getting warmer in the eastern Pacific generally. The Atlantic, very warm indeed, 30 degrees plus in quite a few areas now, as it really gets that warmness going out into the Caribbean, towards the Bahamas. The Gulf Stream looking very good. What you will see later on is the oceanic heat content, which is really responding in the Caribbean Sea and has done for a couple of weeks now. Indian Ocean still looking fairly warm, obviously not much to talk about there. Western Pacific, South China Sea, there's a little bit of upwelling perhaps, but still generally temperatures are fairly good. Philippine Sea, very warm indeed out there, 30 degrees plus. The 26 degree isotherm spreads fairly northwards, Aere will still have just a little bit more time before sea surface temperatures start to go against it. But in general, the Western Pacific doing fairly well. Sea surface temperature anomalies showing this picture, fairly typical as what we've been expecting, what we've been seeing recently. The La Nina effect still there. Eastern Pacific well below average, Western Pacific looking to be trending above average, but the Atlantic is around just above half and half on the higher than average side. And in the Western Caribbean, as you can see there, those massive amounts of oceanic heat content feeding in to the loop current as well in the Gulf of Mexico. And looking at the sorry state of the Eastern Pacific on the oceanic heat content right now, very drab and dreary. Bonnie may still be able to take advantage of it though, so take a look out for what happens on the computer models. So here we have a look at what's going on in the whole Central American area, but mainly what we're looking at there is Bonnie moving off out towards the west, and GFS in the next 5 days suggesting that it will flirt with hurricane status on at least one occasion, probably several, and that is actually a nudge towards the north there on that forecast track, taking it somewhat uncomfortably close to the coast of Pacific Mexico. Further out to sea, you can see that little thing there. I was trying to figure out what word I was going to say. Signature of that potential tropical cyclone, which probably won't happen, and it ends up sinking south of Hawaii and not doing anything else. But you can see it there, just trying a little bit, getting winds towards tropical storm strength, but failing in the long run on that 5-day period. So failing to impress us, that one. And now let's take a look into the Western Pacific. Now this is way out to sea, and look at this wave pushing through. You can see those colors, a strong wave that pushes through into the Western Pacific, and you might be able to make out the Mariana Islands towards the left hand side, and there's its energy there getting fed up northwestwards. And watch that later on, because that starts to become a tropical cyclone towards the end of that 5-day period as it nears the Mariana Islands. So interest over there in Guam and the like. Keep watching over the next few days, see what that wave does. Now looking at the rest of the activity in the Western Pacific, you can see there it is terminal decline for both of those tropical cyclones now. Aere lasts a little bit longer actually, even though it was weaker. Chaba there dies off extremely quickly from this point onwards. It's gone within 24 hours, although its rains won't be. And Aere there, what's left of it, will end up pushing through the northeastern part of China and probably into North Korea. And look at this in the short range as well. GFS playing a little game or two in the Indian Ocean, and there is a little potential tropical cyclone that just tried to funnel itself off just off Indonesia. It would be an incredibly rare and odd place for it to form, very close to the equator as well. But that is something that GFS is throwing up. That's not a TC, but it's at least halfway there. So that's something else that you could spend your time looking at over the next few days. So precipitation amounts, you can see how it unfolds here on the Eastern Pacific, looking at Bonnie particularly, and you can see there's some red zones and orange zones from the GFS model now once again, and some extra rain later on in that 7-day period. You'll also notice that Nicaragua in particular as well over the next 7 days, probably from that next wave, gets some more rainfall that's probably not going to be very welcome. But take a look at some of those values, 12 inches in a few of those red zones for the next 7 days, at 12.5 there just on the coast of Mexico. I think that is still Oaxaca, and that would be to do with Bonnie, so look out for that. Potentially high rain rates. Same too in the Western Pacific. Quite a lot of Chaba's rain has already fallen, but you can still see some red zones. That's for further rainfall, so discounting all of what we've already seen so far, this is extra rainfall on the forecast. 14 inches still possible for an area east of the storm center. I think that would still be Guangdong province, and that is just over 350 millimeters on top of what we've already received. And you can see some totals getting up there in Japan as well, towards 8 inches, 6 inches in North Korea from Tropical Storm Aere and its remnants. So that was quite busy. Into the longer range, this is the 5 to 10 day period. Bonnie continuing there. GFS earlier runs were suggesting that it would get really strong in that period just there, but not this time, just a minimal category 1 probably, and then formation of another hurricane behind it eventually, also getting to category 1 status. I think that's quite a fair forecast, considering that the Eastern Pacific is spent on oceanic heat energy, so I think that is a fair forecast. Dips southwards and then starts to move northwestwards, that second system. So what happens with this Western Pacific thing? It starts to get its energy really together there and becomes a quite significant typhoon, and then a fairly formidable one, really grows into the Philippine Sea, and by the time we get to the end of that 10-day period, it's at least a category 3 storm, probably category 4, moving through the Philippine Sea. That is still a long way out. It's a system that hasn't yet formed, so I wouldn't put any faith into what this is happening yet, but we have got some run consistency. That's all the important stuff done. In the meantime, you can take a look at our Force 13 store, scan that barcode there, and you can take a look at what we've got on offer, now including animations of all varieties on request. And now into the silly range, the very long range for the Eastern Pacific from day 10 to 16. You can see what happens with that second hurricane as it moves continuously towards the west, makes it a little bit further down the line than Bonnie, and almost tries to get towards the Hawaiian Islands but doesn't. Apart from that, Eastern Pacific remains quiet. If you're wondering about the Atlantic, that remains quiet over that period as well, and over all the other periods really. So that looks like another fairly dead period coming up. And in the Western Pacific, there it is. This is the big storm that's next coming up if it happens, and the GFS wants it to slam right headlong into Taiwan and then into China towards the end of that 16-day run. Long way out, and we put it in the silly area here for entertainment purposes more than anything else. I would not be too worried about that yet, and even if it still says that in 5 more days, I would still not be too worried about that even at that point. So take it slowly on that one. On this day in 2002 though, we had 2 legitimate concerns. Typhoon Ramazan was making landfall on the Ayama Islands as a category 3, and Chatan had just formed way down in the tropical zone, and that would end up becoming a really major typhoon for Guam and the Mariana Islands, one of their most destructive as a matter of fact. So a really busy period in the Western Pacific, I suppose showing this year how it was done back then, with 2 much stronger storms than what we've just witnessed. Elsewhere, the world was quiet. Back in 2022, the next name on the Atlantic naming list is Danielle. 3 tropical storms so far, no hurricanes. Eastern Pacific, the next name is Darby. And in the Central Pacific, we're coming up to, I think it was 1,000 days since we've been waiting for Hone. In the Western Pacific, the next name now is Songda. And in the North Indian Ocean, the next name on the list there is Sitrang. Just to point out, Songda has been used 3 times, and each time it's been a category 4 or stronger. So that doesn't bode well. The Australian region, the next name on the list is Darian. The Southwest Indian Ocean's first name on the new list is Ashley. And in the South Pacific, we're looking out for Harley. That's all for now. We'll be back again with another tropical weather bulletin tomorrow night.